On the One Rental at a Time. This is Coach Carson, and I'm on the One Rental at a Time show. I'm here with Grant, who is a 16-year-old who is interested in finance, interested in real estate, and he's got a series of questions that he wants to ask other millionaires that Michael Zuber interviews. So I'm all game. I loved it. Love it. How are you, Grant?
Good, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to answer my questions.
Absolutely. I can't wait. Can't wait to see what's on your mind. What you wanna take it from here? Tell me what questions you've got.
Yeah, so the first question I have is if you could just give a little bit of background about yourself and your experience in investing and specifically real estate investing.
Yeah, my very quick story, my background is I graduated from college in 2002 and I jumped right into real estate investing, but I did it more like that on the flipping side. So I figured out how to find fixer upper properties, foreclosure properties, and I didn't have any money at the time getting out of college, obviously. So I had to figure out ways to find good deals for other people, and I basically made a fee every time I found a good deal for them. And there's a real estate term for that called being a bird dog, where you basically just point to the deal and then I don't have the money to buy it, so somebody else buys it. But it was a really good way for me to learn how to find good deals, which is one of the most important things in real estate. I was able to make a little bit of money. I was living first with my parents in their house for a little while, and then I lived with a friend in his spare bedroom. And that's how I got started, though, like living really, really cheap, eating ramen noodles, and then flipping, learning how to find good deals. But that gave me a good start because then I had a skill. I had a skill that I knew how to go find deals. So then once I started learning how to find the money, get partner with people, get private money so that I could actually buy the deals myself. And that's how I got started.
Cool. So my next question is about kind of specific to people my age. So how early would you start to prioritize real estate investing over other forms of investing, maybe more traditional options like stock and bonds?
Yeah, I love that you're interested in it early. I have a 13-year-old daughter and she's been interested a little bit too. And she asked the same question. I think it depends on the person, but I think real estate really makes sense once you need to move out on your own or once you want to move out on your own, because I always found like the best way to get started is by using your residence as basically a house hack. You ever heard of a house hacking? I'm sure if you study this a little bit. So like there's various ways you could do it. But like if I were going to college again, I played football in college and that's how I paid for my school. But if I had to do over again, I think I would have at a minimum like found like a 3-bedroom apartment or a 4-bedroom apartment where I could live in one unit and negotiate a lease with my landlord and then ask my landlord for permission to sublease it out, my other bedrooms out. So like maybe for example, I could rent it for $1,500, a 4-bedroom apartment, and then rent the other three bedrooms out for $500. And so then I could use their rent to basically for me to live for free by house hacking like a rental property. And that's a really simple way. You don't have to have like $5,000 down to do that. You just have to have a security deposit. You have to ask a bunch of landlords permission. I would do something like that, but at 18 years old is when I would do it. But like if you're 16 and you think that'd be kind of cool to do, I mean, I think there's no there might be some legal ages, and you might be more familiar with when you can technically own a property yourself, but maybe there's a way to get an LLC, maybe there's a way to get a parent involved or another adult. So I think real estate's really cool. Getting the money up front to buy it is like the harder part, because the stock, you can take $1,000 and buy shares of stock, whereas real estate, you got to figure out a way to use some leverage to do that. But that's why I think house hacking or even being creative like with leases and things like that, those are the best ways to get in a little bit lighter and not have to just have a big pile of money to get in.
Great, thank you. So you talk about like restarting your career from the beginning. What do you think would be something that you did differently if you were to be able to do that?
If I were to start over with my whole career, is that the question? Like, what would I do?
Yeah, just
Um,
maybe like my age or college age, what would you do differently?
yeah, some things I wouldn't do differently. I really like that I didn't, for me personally, I'm just not much of a corporate person working for other people. Like I really like being an entrepreneur. I think if I were 16, I would have been an entrepreneur earlier. Like I don't know if you buy and sell stuff or just like try to save money and just invest in stuff. Like I didn't do a lot of that in high school. I was really into sports and my school and academics, which is great too. But I think it would have been fun to try to like start a little business on the side, like maybe go, like these days, like buy stuff go buy stuff at yard sales and then try to flip it on eBay or something like that and make a little bit of money, or just flip anything. Like just learning how to buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell is such a important skill, and it's transferable because you have to learn how to negotiate if you're buying stuff from other people. You got to learn how to control your cost. You got to learn about profit margins. So I think that's something I would have done a little bit easier, just because I think it's fun. It's like a game. Like all business to me is all a game. So it would have been kind of fun to do that for real stakes, to actually make some money on it.
Great. So going back to actually buying and selling properties, when you're looking for a property, when you're thinking about purchasing, what are the things that you look for?
Yeah, I kind of divided it in two categories. Number one, location is the unalterable. You got to have a good location. And what that means, like on the big picture, you want to invest in cities or regions that the population is either stable or growing. It's better if it's growing. And that's pretty simple to find. You can just Google like fastest growing metro areas in the US or fastest growing cities in the US. So as long as you're in, like, I use a metaphor like this, like it's like the solar system. Like you just want to invest in a big city or a metro area that's like the sun. Like it has a lot of energy economically. And then the second thing you want to look for is you want to invest in areas that are more affordable, because you can invest in Manhattan, New York, but like you couldn't get in for something less than a couple $1,000,000 maybe, or $500,000. It's really expensive. So you have to have like the solar system where you find a sun with a lot of energy, like an economic center. But then I like to go to like the little satellite cities, like the little smaller metro areas, or the little smaller neighborhoods that have a little bit more affordability. And affordability, the best way to measure it for me is the rent to price ratio. So if you see a rent in a lot of California has very expensive prices compared to the rents. A difficult rent to price ratio would be something that rents for $2,000 and you have to buy it for $800,000 or $600,000. Like that's a really low rent to price ratio. A more affordable rent to price ratio might be something that rents for $2,000 and you could buy it for $300,000. That's kind of that ratio of those two things. It's not everything. There's a lot more numbers behind that, but that really, like, the question of like how do you choose what to buy? Number one, locations that are dynamic with good economies that are growing, and then number two, you have to have the numbers work, and cash flow. The rent to price ratio is how you pay your bills. That's how you collect rent. You pay your expenses. That's how you afford to pay the mortgage. If you can't do that, then nothing else really works. So I think those are the two things that are like the most important place to start.
So kind of going off of that, what do you think the tools in your toolbox for when you're searching for a property or you're actively like going into the purchase, what do you think the tools are you have?
Yeah, there's a bunch of good tools, but if you're just getting started like at 16, go with the free tools, go with the inexpensive ones. So to do that exercise I was just talking about, looking at the rent and prices, Zillow is great. You can use Zillow, you can use Redfin, you can use any of the national statistics to get data. And you should always be looking at those just to see what's out there, because they're a good aggregator of data. But if you want to go a step beyond, like you actually want to find good deals, and do you think you'd be looking locally, or do you think you would be looking at another place? Because that's one. I'll tell you some tools depending on what you're thinking about.
Yeah, I was thinking probably after I'm like out of the house because I don't know, it'd probably be hard otherwise,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it would depend where I'm like in area wise in college. I don't even know because um it really depends. But
right.
what do you think like generally are like the best tools for that type of thing?
Yeah, so the tool for finding a good deal, if you're going to college, for example, and you want to find that first property that's just interesting, or you just want to practice, there's a tool called Driving for Dollars. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's basically a way where you just ride around neighborhoods, or you walk around neighborhoods, and it's like a game. Really, what you're looking for are a few things. Number one, you're looking for houses that are vacant or properties that are vacant. So like some good signs of a vacant house would be like the grass is really high, or there's like a bunch of, just like you can look at the windows and it looks like nobody's living there. You can see like straight through the windows, or there's just no stuff in the garage. So you'll find all these little signs. And why are you doing that? Why are you looking for vacant houses? Because if a house is vacant, It might be like a landlord owns the property and it's just sitting there and they haven't rented it again. Or it might be that somebody inherited that house and they're just letting it sit and they haven't decided to sell it yet. It could be somebody moved to another part of the country and it's just sitting there. But the common theme is there's just a house sitting there costing somebody money. And if you find these houses and you figure out a way to reach out to them, and there's different tools online. You can just search, you can go to the local tax assessor in many places to try to find out who the owner is, and you can try to Google them or look them up. There's also some paid tools. Like I use a tool called Deal Machine. It's an app that you pay for, and it gives you phone numbers. It allows you to send mail to people. So that would be like a next tier up. You can invest in that once you have a little bit of money. But the point is, you're going around looking for vacant houses. You're looking for fixer-upper houses, even if somebody lives there. You're looking for sale by owner properties. You're looking for rent by owner properties. And so let's say you spend like 2 or 3 hours in a neighborhood, you might find 10 or 20 properties that look interesting. And you put those on a list or you put them in your app. And then you just work on reaching out to those owners and you just ask them if they were interested in selling. 18 out of the 20 will probably say, no, I'm not interested. But then 1 or 2 might say yes. And then you talk to them and you ask them questions and you meet with them. That to me is like one of the most direct tools, easiest ways to find a good deal. It's something you can do in one day, one weekend. You can just like do it right now instead of like thinking about it. You can just go out, do it, and make it happen.
Right. So you talk about house hacking as something that that you're able to do. Could you kind of explain that in pretty brief terms, and then also give
Yeah.
some pros and cons on that?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of a house hack, then I'll give you a couple other variations. So my second property that I lived in when I was 26 years old was a 4-unit building. So like one roof, but it had four different apartments in it, basically. And so I bought this property and I moved into unit number 2, but then I rented unit number 1, 3, and 4. And so the cool thing was like the numbers are a lot different then because it's about 18, 19 years ago. But I rented the total rent from those other units was about $1,100, $1,050, $1,100, and my total payment on my mortgage was just about $1,100 as well. So I used the rent from the other units to pay for my mortgage expenses. And I still had to pay for some maintenance and things like that. But all my friends were paying like $800, $1,000, $1,200 to go live in an apartment or a house somewhere. And I was living for free as a 20 in my 20s. And so all of that money I would have been spending on housing was money I could spend to save money to buy my next investment or to do something different with my business. And so that's the power of house hacking. It's either going to reduce your housing expense, or if you do a really good deal like I did, you can eliminate your housing expense altogether. But either way, like if you can save money in your housing is your biggest expense. Like the average American, I think, spends 30 to 40% of their budget on housing. So it's like that's a life hack. If you can figure out how to like eliminate your housing expense, it opens up a ton of free cash flow that will just either just make it easier for you to survive. Like like you live in San Francisco or if you live in Bay Area, it's just expensive anyway. So being able to house hack might just allow you to live there, period, and own a house or rent a house. But if you really want to get ahead as an investing, you can start with a house hack and then you could keep that property for a while living there. And then let's say 2 or 3 years later, you decide to move up to a house or something different and move to a different area, you can then keep it as a rental property and then rent it out at that point. So it's a good way to not only live there cheap, but then you can keep it and kind of transition into being a landlord and investor. And now you have a good rental property that already has a mortgage. You don't have to get a new mortgage on it. And it's a really cool way to kind of hold a long-term rental property.
Great. So my next question is about the most important things to know. So for a total beginner, what do you think the number one lesson is?
I think the number one lesson is you have to study your market. Michael would say, do your work. You got to do the work. And so you got to study 2 things. You got to study the resale market. This goes back to Zillow and Redfin. You can just study this every day. Like, what are properties selling for in my area? Like if I were to come with you, Grant, and I was going to ride around in a car with you or just walk around your neighborhood, if you really knew your market, if you really studied it, I should be able to point at a house for sale and I say, all right, Grant, what's that house for sale for? to be like, oh, I think it's about 400,000 or 800,000 or whatever the number is, right? That's like a muscle. As a new investor, you might not be as experienced as somebody who's been in the business 20 years. You might not have as much money as somebody else does, but you can control that. Like you can study it, just like you study something in school, and you can learn every single property that's for sale, how much properties have sold for. Like you can look on Zillow to see all the properties that sold in the last 3 months or the 6 months, and you can just study those trends and understand them and get to know them really well. And then you can do the same thing with rents. You can study the rents. Here's what a house rents for here. Here's what a house rents for here. Here's what an apartment rents for here. So I think that's something that really is really important for a new investor to know, is that knowledge of the market is your secret weapon. It's something like when I was 23 years old and I got into real estate, I had no money. I didn't have any experience, but I was willing to hustle. Like I was a good learner. I was a good student. So I learned in 3 months, 6 months, I learned some things that other investors who are a little bit lazier or took things for granted, it took them a lot longer, or they just never did learn those things. So I think as a new investor, you can sometimes come in and compete better than some of the more experienced people because you focus on the fundamentals, because you hustle, because you spend your time on it. And I think if you, as a new investor, realize that you have a competitive advantage to compensate you for some of those, things you don't have, then that can be really beneficial.
Great. So my last question is kind of related. What do you think is one mistake that young investors should be avoiding?
Uh, I think it depends on the person, but I think one mistake is people try to get ahead of themselves. They see like the goal they think they forget that you have to do a lot of work and you have to pay your dues a little bit to get to anywhere. So like if you were to be trying to think of an example, if you're gonna be a doctor, you got to go to college, you got to go to med school, you got to learn, you got to like, there's a sacrifice you have to make in order to see the results that you want to have. If you're a farmer, like if you want to plant a tree, a fruit tree, you got to plant the tree, you got to water it, you got to let it grow. So like these things, there's a natural like order to things that you have to be patient with yourself. And so I think a lot of people, they expect things to happen right away. And there are some things that can happen. Like if you hustle, you can get some pretty, like I was just talking about, 3 months, 6 months, you can get really good at something and start seeing some results. But ultimately, this is a business. Real estate investing is a long game. And the people who are successful at it, they see this as like a skill set or something they're willing to invest in for the next 5, 10 years, not just for the next 6 months. So I think that long-term mindset and that commitment to being really good at something, like it's almost like a craft. Like you're an artisan, you're a apprentice, you're coming here to learn something, and then have that long-term mindset that you're going to be humble enough to recognize that I'm new and I'm willing to learn, talk to people like Michael, do what you're doing, ask questions. And if you do that, then you'll absorb a lot, you'll learn a lot. And you also, the people who are experienced appreciate that humble attitude that you bring, that you just want to learn, you're here to learn. And not everybody does that. So that'll help you out.
Great. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer my questions.
You're welcome. Good
All right.
questions.
I'm going to pass it off.